My boyfriend had a tight-knit friend group consisting of 3 guys and 1 girl. Before introducing me to them, he gave me a dead serious warning. If you dare to mess with that girl, we're done immediately. I nodded obediently, but inside I was thrilled. Stealing the spotlight from the group's precious princess? That is exactly what girls like me do best. Even though you're my girlfriend, Monroe holds the most important place in my heart, Holden said, his face deadpan. If you want to be with me, you have to. Respect her and protect her. After his ridiculous speech, my dorm roommates were ready to explode. I quickly covered their mouths, smiling sweetly while nodding at him. Of course, babe. Your friends are my friends. Monroe and I are definitely going to be besties. Seeing me act so submissive made my roommates furious. You're literally the prettiest girl on campus, and you're lowering yourself for a guy in a clique? You're going to regret this. They stormed out, but I didn't care. I linked my arm affectionately through Holden's. Come on, let's not keep your friends waiting. The moment I opened the door to the off-campus diner, I saw her sitting right in the center of the booth. She was wearing a white sundress, sporting an innocent, doe-eyed look, exactly the type of aesthetic frat guys would call the ultimate. The girl next door. 2 good-looking guys were sitting on either side of her. Her body language was incredibly intimate with both of them. I expected this legendary group princess to act spoiled and arrogant, but the second she saw me, she practically jumped out of the booth and grabbed my hands. Enthusiastically. You must be Holden's new girlfriend. You are gorgeous. These are Deacon and Silas. What are you guys just sitting there for? Welcome our newest member. She introduced me to the other 2 guys in the group. For some reason, I could instantly feel the hostility radiating from both of them. The guy with the glasses, Silas, gave me a tight, fake smile and barely shook my hand. The other one, Deacon, who had a buzz cut and an athletic build, crossed his arms and didn't even try to hide his distaste. I wet my lips, and my smile grew even wider. Monroe was still holding my hand, chattering away without taking a breath. How could a girl as pretty as you fall for Holden? What were you thinking? Holden affectionately ruffled her hair, took off his denim jacket, and draped it over her shoulders. You run cold. This will keep you warm. Monroe immediately looked at me. I hope this doesn't make Sloane jealous. I really don't want to cause any drama between us. The booth fell dead silent. Holden frowned. I just raised an eyebrow, looking completely unbothered. Of course I'm not jealous, I said smoothly. Holden already told me you're like the little sister of the group. Now that I've met you, I totally get it. You're so cute and sweet. It's no wonder they all treat you like a princess. Holden and the guys visibly relaxed. Monroe's expression froze for a fraction of a second before her bright smile returned. You're so different from other girls, Monroe gushed. Holden's exes were always trying to compete with me for no reason. I just wanted to be their friend, but they always hated me. She blushed slightly. To protect me from getting hurt, the guys just stopped dating anyone. She paused, looking at Holden with a hint of playful reproach. I can't believe you actually fell for Sloane. She must have some serious skills. I just smiled, pretending not to notice her subtle, passive-aggressive stab. Soon, our food arrived. I could feel that Monroe was gearing up to pull a stunt. I stayed perfectly calm, ready for our first real showdown. I genuinely hoped she was good at this. I didn't want to be disappointed. Suddenly, Monroe let out a sharp shriek as a little bit of her hot tomato bisque spilled onto her lap. She clutched her sundress, her face twisting in. Exaggerated pain. I was just leaning in to see if she was okay when Holden violently shoved me back, knocking me onto the diner floor. Deacon was furious. I knew it. All girls are exactly the same. You played the understanding girlfriend 5 minutes ago, and now you're showing your true colors. Silas adjusted his glasses coldly. We made a promise to protect Monroe forever. Nobody gets to hurt her. It's your first time meeting her, and your girlfriend already burned her out of pure jealousy. Holden, don't you think you owe us an explanation? Holden's face darkened. Sloane, apologize to Monroe right now. Monroe was now huddled between the 2 guys, shooting me a tiny, arrogant smirk. Most girls would have grabbed their bags and left after being treated like that by their boyfriend and his friends. But I'm not like most girls. Tears instantly welled up in my eyes, perfectly brimming on my lower lashes. My voice trembled when I spoke. I am so sorry, Monroe. I really didn't see your bowl when I was trying to reach for the napkins. I tilted my head, looking as vulnerable and small as humanly possible. I really love Holden, and I honestly just wanted to be your friend. You're so kind. I know you'll forgive. Me, right? Monroe's expression, along with her entire body, went rigid. She forced a stiff smile. Of course. Don't blame Sloane, guys. She didn't mean to. I threw myself into Holden's arms, letting a few perfect tears roll down my cheeks while looking up at him with pure heartbreak. For the first time, Holden actually looked guilty. He wrapped his arms around me and was about to say something when Monroe loudly interrupted. Let's just finish eating and go to the campus rec center. Holden, didn't you say you'd teach me how to swim? I even bought a new swimsuit. The second Monroe spoke, nobody cared whether I had finished my meal. The guys dropped their spoons. Let's go. The three of them surrounded Monroe like she was royalty, leaving me trailing behind alone. Holden kept glancing back at me, but Monroe immediately clung to him, pretending to ask him about breathing. Techniques in the water? Deacon scoffed. I swim way better than Holden. Let me teach you. Monroe smiled sweetly. One at a time. You can go next. We arrived at the university's indoor pool. Monroe changed into a modest, floral, one piece and clung to Holden's arm with absolutely no boundaries. The second, her toe touched the water, she squealed and jumped directly into his arms. I walked out in my own sleek swimsuit and saw exactly that. Holden, I don't know how to swim either, I called out. Can you teach me? Holden and the guys turned around, their eyes widening in shock. For a calculated girl like me, appearances are everything. A few random guys from a frat who were hanging out by the pool couldn't stop staring at me. Holden's face immediately clouded over with jealousy. He instinctively let go of Monroe and started walking toward me, but Monroe grabbed his hand, smiling at them me. Sorry, Sloane. Holden is all mine today. Holden hesitated. He rubbed the back of his neck. I did promise Monroe first. Just hang on a bit. They waded deeper into the water together. Monroe kept splashing around, pressing herself against Holden. I was just watching them when a random college bro walked up to me. Hey, gorgeous, want me to teach you how to swim? Holden's face went dark from across the pool. That's my girlfriend? Back off. The frat guy looked at Holden, then at Monroe, practically wrapped around him, and scoffed. You want to have your cake and eat it too, man? You have a girl, but you can't keep your hands to yourself with that one. Holden exploded. What are you talking about? I only see Monroe as a sister. A sister you're awfully handsy with, the guy muttered. I almost laughed out loud. Worried that things might escalate and ruin my angle, I quickly told the stranger, thanks, but I'm fine by myself. The guy walked away reluctantly, but not before slipping me his number. Pretty girl, if you ever dump the loser, hit me up. Once he was out of earshot, Holden snapped at me. Those guys just want to take advantage of you. Can you be more careful? I looked down nervously. But I'm bored just standing here alone. Since you're busy teaching Monroe, maybe Deacon or Silas can teach me. They're such good friends of yours. They wouldn't take advantage of me, right? Deacon, who was sitting on the edge of the pool, blurted out, Who wants to take advantage of you? Do you think you're some kind of supermodel or something? I smiled innocently. Great, then it's settled. You guys can teach me. Reluctantly, they helped me into the water. From nearby, Monroe's annoying, shrill voice rang out. Holden, are you even paying attention? I glanced over and caught Holden's eye. Ever since I got into the water, he had been totally distracted, constantly checking on me. Monroe was visibly getting irritated. I blinked and suddenly my leg cramped. I let out a gasp and fell right into Deacon's arms. Deacon completely froze. My calf hurts so much. Could you massage it? I forgot to stretch before getting in. I whispered into Deacon's ear while simultaneously giving Silas a pitiful, pleading look. Silas hesitated for a second, then ducked under the water to massage my calf. Deacon! Monroe's screech echoed across the indoor pool. Deacon jolted like he'd been shocked and shoved me away. He immediately swam toward Monroe. The sudden, rough movement pushed me under the water, and I accidentally swallowed a mouthful. The genuine panic of going under made me instinctively grab onto Silas, and in the chaos of trying to find the surface and catch my breath, my lips briefly crashed against his. Silas's eyes went wide behind his water-splattered glasses. Once I found my footing and my leg felt better, I climbed out onto the pool deck. Silas was looking away, completely unable to meet my eyes. The second I was out, Monroe marched over to me, absolutely fuming. Sloane, you are Holden's girlfriend. How could you be so inappropriate with Deacon hugging and kissing in front of everyone? Where is your respect for Holden? I looked deeply hurt, opening my mouth to explain, when both Silas and Deacon spoke up at the exact same time. That's not what happened. Silas's voice cracked like dry thunder, slicing through the heavy tension. Monroe whipped around to look at him, her face twisting in fake dismay, acting as if she couldn't comprehend why they were contradicting her. But Silas, usually so calm, so reserved behind his glasses and neutral, expressions took a step forward. Sloane didn't do anything wrong. She was going. Under. I saw it. It was a reflex, not a kiss. And Deacon was just trying to help. Her stand up. Stop making things up. Deacon, water still dripping from his buzz cut, clenched his jaw, his arms, tightly crossed over his chest. He nodded with a low grunt. Cut the crap. Monroe. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't tense. It was pregnant with expectation. For the first time, something in the group's power dynamic fundamentally shifted. Holden looked at me, confused, as if the ground beneath his feet was suddenly giving way. Silas, are you seriously defending Sloane? Silas turned to him, his face dead serious. He was an intense guy, light brown, hair, lean, but with a firm posture. His voice dropped lower, sounding more honest than I'd ever heard him. I'm telling the truth, Holden. Sloane doesn't deserve this. Monroe took half a step back. Her rosy cheeks paled a little. Then I saw her. Lower lip trembled just the slightest bit. It was a subtle move, but I was paying close attention. She was losing. I wiped my face with a towel, moving very slowly. I pretended to still be a bit dizzy, acting like I couldn't quite process what was happening. Holden awkwardly walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. Sloane, I just got scared. I thought you had done something to Monroe. Why would you ever think that? I asked softly, looking up into his eyes. Do you really believe I'd be capable of hurting her? He stammered. No, of course not. It's just that I gently stepped out of his reach, not making a scene. I wrapped the towel tightly around myself and walked over to the bleachers where I had left my duffel bag. As I walked, I could feel all their eyes burning into my back. I sat down, crossed my legs, and calmly started drying my hair. Every gesture was calculated, every breath measured. Monroe was still standing at the edge of the pool, completely alone. That was unprecedented. She always had one of the guys hovering by her side, always. But this time they were all looking at her with doubt, even Holden. Silas walked over to me, holding out a bottle of water. Are you okay? I looked up at him. I really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Young, maybe 21 or 22. Lean, but with broad shoulders. Clean-shaven, with a tiny scar on his left eyebrow that made him look way more interesting than he probably realized. Thank you for what you said. You didn't have to put yourself in the middle of that, he said, lowering his voice. Nobody should have to deal with that. I heard something in his tone, something that had nothing to do with blind group, loyalty, or basic politeness. It was something deeply human, something personal. I leaned just slightly toward him. You know what the funniest part is? I said, a faint smile touching my lips. It wasn't the water that made me feel like I was drowning. His eyes widened slightly, and then he looked down at the floor. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable, but then he smiled. A shy, genuine smile. Monroe marched over right at that moment, interrupting as always with her high-pitched, sing-song voice. Sloane, can we talk? Just the two of us? I looked at her for a second, and for the very first time, I didn't smile. What? For? Another performance? Her eyes flashed with suppressed rage, but she desperately maintained her composure. I just want to clear the air. In front of everyone, or in private, where nobody can see if you decide to play the victim again. Her smile cracked. I didn't say another word. I simply turned away, wrapping myself in silence. Silas looked at me with a mixture of surprise and profound admiration. You're different, he murmured. I know, I replied, and it's about time someone noticed. Holden approached me again, this time with extreme caution. Sloane, do you want to talk tonight? I looked him dead in the eyes. No trace of tears. No fake sweetness. Just pure, absolute calm. About what? About how I pushed you to the floor over an assumption. He swallowed hard. I made a mistake. You did, I said softly, and I made one by staying. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked out. I left the rec center with a completely serene heart, my skin still warm from the indoor heating, the air on. Campus was already buzzing with whispers. It wasn't clear words, just that low hum that signals a major shift in the social hierarchy. I walked across the damp tile of the locker room, holding my flip-flops in my hand, feeling every stare. Hit my back like a question nobody was brave enough to ask. I never looked back. When I got back to my dorm, my roommates were out. I sat on my bed, dropped the towel, and threw on an oversized college sweatshirt. I looked at myself in the mirror. Dark, damp hair, pale skin, calm eyes. There was no running mascara, no exaggerated drama. That was exactly the kind of thing that disarmed people like Monroe the most. The text came later that night. From an unknown number. Sloan, we need to talk. Not like this, I texted back. The next morning, the campus woke up to a suspiciously quiet atmosphere. In the massive lecture hall for our shared humanities prerequisite, Monroe was sitting in the front row. She wore a light pastel dress, her brown hair perfectly styled, as always, but something was off. Her shoulders were rigid, her hands were twisting nervously over her open notebook. Holden sat 2 rows behind her, not next to her. Deacon walked in late, tall, athletic, 23, sporting some new stubble. He actively avoided looking at her and took a seat near the door. Silas arrived last, clutching a binder to his chest, his glasses slightly crooked. When our eyes met across the room, he looked away not with guilt, but with resolve. The professor started the lecture, but nobody was paying attention. Monroe slowly raised her hand, her voice sounding frail and shaky. Professor, may I be excused for a moment? I'm not feeling well. She said it while looking directly at Deacon, fully expecting him to jump up, chase after her, and play the savior. Nobody moved. She walked out of the double doors alone. The whispers immediately broke out, across the hall like a wave crashing against rocks. I just kept taking notes. 2 rows back, I felt Silas leaning forward. Don't leave, he whispered. This is going to be a mess. I didn't answer. Minutes later, the heavy wooden doors swung open violently. Monroe practically threw herself back into the room, her eyes shining with tears, breathing heavily. She leaned against a desk, highly theatrical. I'm so sorry, she gasped. It's just, all of this is too much for me. Deacon finally stood up. Monroe, drop it. His voice was brutally dry, void of any affection. She looked at him as if he had just slapped her across the face. What? Yesterday. And now this. He ran a hand over his buzz cut in pure frustration. You literally texted me to pretend you were having a panic attack. You said it. Would remind the group how much we all need you. The entire lecture hall went dead silent. Monroe shook her head, looking panicked. No, Deacon, you're confused. Silas stood up and unlocked his phone. No, he's not. Silas read the iMessage. Out loud, word for word. His voice didn't shake. I finally looked up from my notebook. Monroe's eyes locked onto mine. The sickly sweetness was entirely gone. There was only raw fear. Sloan, she pleaded, looking for a lifeline. Say something. I stood up slowly, picking up my pen. I have nothing to say, I replied. Clearly. You were always the one speaking for everyone else. The professor cleared his throat awkwardly, but it was too late. The spell was completely broken. Monroe ran out of the lecture hall for real this time. And this time, absolutely no one followed her. Silas sat back down. Deacon remained standing for a second longer, looking like a man waking up from a decade-long, exhausting fever dream. Holden didn't look at me. I went back to writing my notes. For the first time in years, the campus princess was truly alone, and her precious silence was no longer protecting her. Holden caught up to me on the outdoor steps of the humanities building as the afternoon sun cast long, dramatic shadows over the brick pathways. I heard his heavy footsteps before I heard my name. Sloan. I didn't stop. Sloan? Wait. I sighed and turned around slowly. Holden stood in front of me tall, broad-shouldered, 22, his dark hair normally coiffed to perfection. But right now, his confident face looked shattered, like someone had rearranged his features while he wasn't looking. What do you want? I asked. I wasn't harsh, but I certainly wasn't sweet. To talk. He ran a hand over the back of his neck. I need to explain what happened. No, you don't, I replied calmly. You need to explain it to yourself. That threw him off. Don't be like that. I was just trying to protect Monroe. She's always been so fragile. I let out a soft laugh. She isn't fragile, Holden. She's just comfortable. He frowned deeply. How can you say that after seeing her break down like that? I took a single step toward him. I didn't invade his personal space, just got close enough to force him to look me in the eye. Because I saw exactly what she was doing long before I ever met you. Because that role she plays isn't improvised. It's rehearsed. He went completely quiet. The sounds of the campus buzzed around us, distant. Laughter, doors slamming, skateboards rolling over concrete, but the air between us felt suffocatingly thick. Yesterday, I continued, my voice steady. When you shoved me to the ground, it wasn't the physical impact that hurt. He looked at the pavement. I'm sorry, I know. And he did know. But it wasn't enough. He looked up desperately. What else do? You want me to do? That was the exact wrong question. I don't want you to do anything, I said. I want you to realize something. Realize what? That you never actually chose me. I took a deep breath. It was always Monroe. First, I was just an afterthought. He shook his head frantically. That's not true. It is. I tilted my head. Yesterday at the pool, who did you believe without a second thought? He didn't answer. In the lecture hall when she fell apart, who did you look at first? He pressed his lips together. And right now, I concluded softly. You're standing here because your group is falling apart. Not because you're heartbroken over losing me. That was the line that finally broke him. I love you, he pleaded, the words, sounding more like a desperate beg than a declaration. I looked at him for a long time. I saw a college boy who desperately needed to play the hero, who needed a girl to depend on him so he could feel like a man. And I realized that with Holden, there would always be a Monroe. She might have a different name next time, a different face, but there would always be someone else he felt the need to protect. No, I replied softly. You love me the way you love stability. And I didn't. Come here to be a safe house for your insecurities. I took a step back. Sloan, he begged, don't do this like this. This is exactly how it has to be done. I slowly slid off the promise ring he had given me at the start of the semester. I placed it gently into his open palm. I don't hate you, Holden, but I'm also not going to compete for a space in your life that was never mine to begin with. He closed his fingers around the ring. He didn't try to stop me again. I walked, away without running, without crying. Every step was firm and definitive. When I reached the main campus quad, Silas was sitting on a stone bench under a massive oak tree, reading a paperback. When he saw me, he looked up. His eyes scanned my face, as if checking the weather for a storm that never arrived. Everything okay? He asked. I sat down next to him on the cold stone. It's over. He nodded slowly. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just quietly closed his book. If you need silence, he said, I can sit here and not say a word. I looked at him. That incredibly simple offer shifted something deep inside my chest, something Holden had never been capable of understanding. Thank you, I replied. We just sat there, watching the sun dip below the red brick buildings of the TAST campus. And for the first time since this whole ordeal started, I felt like I was no longer playing a rigged game. I don't know how long we sat on that stone bench at the edge of the quad. We didn't speak. The sun had completely vanished behind the university skyline when Silas finally stood up. Do you want to walk for a bit? I nodded. I stood up, my body feeling lighter but somehow more vulnerable. Silas walked with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his strides measured, as if he didn't want to walk too fast or get uncomfortably close. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was gentle. I saw Holden earlier, he said, not looking directly at me. He looked lost. He is, I replied. And you? No, I think I finally found myself. He nodded, and for a moment I thought he was going to drop it. But after a few strides, he ducked his head slightly and mumbled, Can I ask you something? Without it sounding weird? You can try. Did it bother you? What happened in the pool? I stopped walking. He stopped too. The warm glow of the campus streetlights fell over his face. His jawline was sharp, but his expression carried this endearing, sweet clumsiness I had never noticed before. You mean the kiss? I clarified. He nodded, staring intently at his sneakers. It didn't bother me, I said truthfully. It was crazy, yeah. But it was also human. Silas let out a low, incredibly relieved laugh. It was the kind of laugh that slips out when you realize you haven't ruined everything. I really thought you'd hate me for that. Or for trying to play savior. Or for having absolutely no idea how to act afterward. I studied him for a second. His hair was a bit messy, his glasses slightly askew, his flannel shirt a little wrinkled. He wasn't polished like Holden, who always looked like he stepped out of a frat catalog. But there was something so unapologetically honest about his awkwardness. It felt real. And how do you want to act now? I asked. Silas looked down, clearly thinking it over. I want to get to know you, he said. No dramatic declarations, no mention of Monroe, no mention of Holden, just that. I stayed quiet. It wasn't a cheesy romantic line. He wasn't demanding an immediate answer. It was just the truth. Like, a date? I asked. Yeah, but zero pressure. he added quickly. We can just go out, grab a bite, and talk. No masks. I thought about it. I, the girl who had calculated every single move in this social chess match with surgical precision, suddenly found myself facing a scenario with no underlying strategy, just pure curiosity. Okay, I said. Tomorrow at 6. He smiled, and that unpracticed, genuine smile totally caught me off guard. Do. You like jazz? There's a spot downtown. I've never really listened to it. Then we'll start there. We said goodbye at the entrance to my dorm building. There were no forced hugs or lingering touches, just a long, meaningful look before we parted ways. I walked up to my room feeling an incredibly strange sense of peace, like the universe was finally tilting in the right direction. But of course, peace in my world never lasts long. When I checked my phone, 2 messages were waiting. One from Deacon. Can we talk? Tomorrow? I need to understand some things. And one from Monroe. You are not going to destroy me this easily. The war wasn't completely over yet, but for the very first time, I had an ally who didn't fight with swords and secrets, but with patience and music. The next morning, the campus dining hall was much quieter than usual. Despite the clattering of silverware and the low hum of conversation, there was a heavy, invisible tension hanging over the tables. A collective held breath. Everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was wearing a soft beige sweater, high-waisted vintage jeans, and my hair pulled back in a low ponytail. I didn't dress to draw attention, but I knew everyone was watching me out of the corner of their eyes. Silas was already there, sitting by the tall windows with his dining tray. He offered a small, discreet smile when he saw me. I returned it and walked over, calmly. Ready for jazz tonight? He asked, poking his fork into a grain bowl without much enthusiasm. Always ready for the unknown, I said, sitting down across from him. Before he could respond, the temperature in the dining hall seemed to drop. Monroe walked in, and she wasn't alone. She was wearing a tight white mini dress, her hair cascading down her back in perfect beach waves. Flanking her were 2 girls I didn't recognize, both dressed similarly, acting like a carefully curated bodyguard detail. They were smiling, but their eyes were dead. Monroe stopped right at our table, smiling as if nothing had ever happened. Morning, Sloan. Good morning, Silas. Monroe. Seems like you've been busy making new friends, I noted, taking a sip of my coffee. She glanced down at Silas for a fraction of a second. I'm just glad to see. You've found someone who tolerates you. Silas frowned deeply but held his tongue. Monroe turned her fake sweet gaze back. To me. Mind if I sit? Aren't you pretty comfortable looking down on people from up there? I replied, smoothly, not changing my tone. The smile on her face pulled tight. I was just wondering if you had heard the rumors going around campus. I raised a single eyebrow. What kind of rumors? About how you've been working your way through the whole group. Deacon, Silas, even Holden. People are saying you're just playing all of them at once. To see who sticks. Silas stiffened, clearly uncomfortable. The muscle in his jaw jumped. Who exactly is saying that? He demanded. Monroe deliberately ignored him. There are screenshots, Sloan. Text threads of yours that look pretty compromising. I let out a short, genuine laugh. And those screenshots, they just miraculously came from your phone, right? She blinked rapidly, feigning innocence. I have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my iPhone. The problem, Monroe, is that you forgot iMessage has timestamps and that it shows exactly who forwarded what. I unlocked the screen, pulled up the exact thread Deacon had sent me the night before, and pushed the phone across the table to Silas. He read the screen in. Complete silence. Then he looked up at Monroe. You faked texts to make it look like Sloan was trying to tear the group apart, Silas stated flatly. Monroe finally dropped the sweetheart act. Her voice turned venomous. Are you really this blind? Do you actually think she gives a damn about you? Yes, Silas said simply. Because she actually shows it, instead of trying to drag everyone else down to prove her worth. A collective murmur rolled through the adjacent tables. Some people were pretending to look at their laptops. Others were blatantly staring. Monroe glared at me, the mask entirely stripped away. What do you want from me, Sloan? Nothing, I said calmly. Just for you to stop disguising your massive insecurities as kindness. She stood frozen. One of the backup girls whispered something to her, but Monroe didn't budge. She was completely out of moves. I leaned slightly forward over the table, dropping my voice so only she could hear the final nail in the coffin. You got so used to being worshipped that you forgot the difference. Forced. Admiration isn't love, Monroe. It's fear. And people aren't afraid of you anymore. I stood up, grabbing my tray. Silas stood up right behind me. We walked away, leaving her standing there amidst the crunching whispers of the student body. I didn't need to say another word. As we pushed through the dining hall doors, I could feel the invisible crown finally shattering on the tile floor behind me. I found her later that afternoon in the botanical gardens behind the science center. She was sitting on a cast iron bench, partially hidden by an overgrown weeping willow. I wasn't actively looking for her. Or maybe, deep down, I was. The late afternoon sun painted the campus in shades of burnt orange. It was unusually quiet. Even the usual hum of college life felt miles away. Monroe was totally alone. No Deacon, no Silas, no Holden, no backup girls. She wasn't wearing any makeup. Her eyes looked smaller and there were faint smudges of old mascara under her lashes, like she had been crying in a bathroom. Stall. Her pristine white dress was wrinkled. She was clutching her phone with both hands, staring blindly at the dark screen. I stopped a few feet away. I didn't come here to start another fight, I said. Quietly. She didn't lift her head. Then why did you come? I don't know. A thick, heavy silence settled between us. It was the kind of silence I normally would have weaponized to my advantage. But I didn't want to win anymore. Not here, not now. Monroe finally looked up. Her brown eyes were bloodshot, but there was no anger left in them. Just an exhaustion I had never seen on her face before. Everybody hates me, she whispered. No, I replied, sitting down on the far edge of the bench. I didn't touch her. They just stopped obeying you. That's not the same thing. She let out a shaky sigh. It feels like the exact same thing. She looked down and tossed her phone onto the bench. She pulled her hair back into a messy bun using a scrunchie from her wrist. Stripped of the glamour, she just looked like a normal college kid. Young, pretty, but incredibly tired. Up close, she looked more fragile and vastly more real than I had ever realized. Do you know what it's like growing up constantly hearing that you're special? She asked suddenly, her voice hollow. That the world is supposed to revolve around you? That you have to maintain this perfect image? That other girls are always going to be jealous of you? And that you just have to accept it? I can imagine, I said evenly. But I never used my own insecurities as an excuse to step on other people's throats. She laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I didn't step on anyone. I just defended myself before they had the chance to attack me. By playing the victim first, I didn't soften the blow. Monroe looked at me as if she had desperately wanted me to disagree with her. Maybe deep down she wanted someone to call her out. I always felt like if I stopped being absolutely perfect, nobody would stick around. That sentence hung in the cool air, vibrating somewhere deep in my chest. It's not about being perfect, I told her quietly. It's about being authentic. And you never gave any of them the chance to know the real you. A long moment passed. She nodded, barely a fraction of an inch. I don't even know who I am when people aren't looking at me. That level of raw honesty actually hurt to hear. I stood up. You need to figure that out, I said. And you need to do it without an audience, without knights in shining armor shielding you from reality. Monroe tilted her head back, looking at the canopy of leaves. Do you think it's too late for me? I paused on the gravel path. No, I said. Just make sure the next time someone admires you, it's for something real. I walked back toward the main campus. There was a strange knot in my stomach. It wasn't the thrill of victory. It wasn't relief. It was empathy. And I honestly didn't know what to do with it. Monroe hadn't apologized to me, but for the first time, she hadn't tried to tear me down either. And that was a start. The Jazz Cafe was about 5 blocks off campus, tucked away on Main Street. It was a small, intimate venue with an exposed brick facade and a heavy wooden door that creaked when you pushed it. Even from the sidewalk, you could hear the mellow hum of a trumpet and a walking bass line. Silas was waiting outside. He wasn't dressed up to impress anyone. He wore a faded chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up, dark jeans, and his hair was doing its own messy thing. His glasses were still slightly crooked, but he made absolutely no effort to fix them. With Silas, that was the ultimate sign of comfort. You're right on time, he smiled. I always show up when I'm supposed to. We walked inside together. The room was warm, lit by dim Edison bulbs hanging from the ceiling. Tiny scuffed wooden tables dotted the floor. A local trio was playing in the corner piano, upright bass, and trumpet. The music filled the room beautifully without overpowering it. We took a small booth by the window. We ordered coffee and dessert, a slice of warm apple pie for me, and dark chocolate cake for him. Silas looked around the room as if the building itself was feeding his soul. I used to come here by myself all the time, he confessed, tracing the rim of his coffee mug. I liked being in a place where I didn't have to talk. I could just listen. And now? I asked. He looked at me, holding my gaze entirely. Now, I want to talk to you. I looked down at my mug. The steam rising from the dark roast swirled in the dim light. I didn't answer right away. There was something about the way he spoke. He never sounded like he was trying to run a game or hit a punchline. He was just painfully genuine. What do you want to know about me, Silas? He leaned back in the booth, crossing his arms comfortably. I want to know if you ever actually dropped your guard. The question caught me completely off guard. Not because of what he asked, but how he asked it. It didn't sound like an accusation. It was just pure, unfiltered curiosity. Sometimes I admitted, but rarely when people are watching. And now? He didn't push. His brown eyes behind the lenses demanded nothing. He was just waiting, patiently. I leaned back against the vinyl booth. Now, yeah, a little. He smiled, and then he let out a soft chuckle. What's so funny? I asked. I don't know. I honestly thought you were going to dodge the question and spin it back on me, like you do with everyone else. You aren't everyone else. We fell back into silence. But this time, it was a warm, safe silence. It felt like for the very first time in my life, someone was actually listening to me. Without planning their next counterattack, Silas leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. I'm terrified of ruining this. Ruining what? Us? This conversation? Tonight? Whatever this is that's starting? I didn't have a witty comeback. I leaned in too, mirroring his posture, resting. My elbows on the scarred wood. I gave him a small, rare smile. I'm terrified, too. We stared at each other for several long seconds. And then, blending perfectly, with the soft rhythm of the jazz bass line, he reached across the table. Our hands met in the center. It wasn't a dramatic, sweeping gesture. It wasn't heavy, with expectations. It was just an honest connection. We didn't kiss. Not yet. But holding his hand across that tiny table felt more intimate than anything I had ever experienced before. We left the cafe late into the evening. Silas walked me all the way back to my dorm. He didn't pull the classic college guy move and ask, "Can I come up?" Or, "When am I seeing you tomorrow?" He just stood under the glow of the porch light and looked at me. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For letting me see the real you." He turned and walked back into the night. I stood on the concrete steps, my heart doing something completely new. It was beating for something simple. Something clean. Something I didn't have to manipulate to win. It was something that just needed to be nurtured. I met Deacon outside the campus rec center, just like he had asked. He was leaning against a brick pillar, his arms crossed over his chest, staring at the concrete. Deacon had always been the hardest one for me to read. With his sharp, athletic features and the permanent scowl he seemed to wear, he rarely showed any real emotion. But tonight, under the harsh security lights of the gym, he just looked totally drained. "You came," he said, not lifting his head. "You asked me to." He nodded slowly. We stood in silence while a cold breeze blew across the empty parking lot, kicking up a stray flyer. Finally, he spoke. "She played me." He didn't say Monroe's name. We both knew. "And I let her do it," he continued, his voice thick with frustration. "Because it was easier than actually thinking for myself. Because I liked feeling like I was the muscle of the group, like I belonged somewhere." He stepped away from the pillar and finally looked at me. His eyes weren't angry. They were incredibly disappointed. At himself. Monroe manipulated the hell out of me, but I can't even blame her for all of it. I blame myself for being so blind, for being so damn comfortable following her lead without ever asking questions. And now, he took a deep breath. Now, I'm completely done with the act. I'm sick of clapping for a show where nobody is telling the truth. We looked at each other. The guy standing in front of me was not the same arrogant athlete who had scoffed at me on day one. Nor was he the guy who screamed at me by the pool. This Deacon was someone finally learning how to use his own voice. I told Monroe I'm out. She can't count on me to be her attack dog anymore, he stated. What did she say? That she was going to be completely alone without me. And what did you tell her? That her being alone wasn't my fault anymore. I crossed my arms not defensively, but just to hold the weight of the honesty he was laying out in the cold air. What about you, Sloane? He asked suddenly. Why did you go through with all this? What was your actual endgame? I thought about it. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to hide behind a mask of strategy. I could just hand him the unvarnished truth. At first, honestly, I just wanted to beat Monroe at her own game. I wanted to prove that I could walk into her kingdom and not be crushed by it. But now I just want to be around people who don't require me to put on a performance, just to be accepted. Deacon nodded slowly. He looked up at the sky, letting out a long breath of clean air. I totally underestimated you. I know, I replied. Almost everyone did. He let out a short, bitter laugh. I'm glad Silas is the one with you. He's the only guy in our circle who always looked at you without feeling threatened. And you? I looked at you and saw a threat, he admitted freely. It's not the same. We stood face to face, two former enemies with zero bad blood left between us. Deacon stuck his hand out. I took it, giving him a firm shake. Good luck, Sloane. You too, Deacon. We walked away in opposite directions. No promises to stay in touch. No. Lingering grudges. The exclusive clique we had all bled for was officially dead. There was no queen, and there were no pawns. Just regular college kids trying to start over. I saw Monroe 2 days later in an empty classroom on the 3rd floor of the Pay Humanities building. It was completely unplanned. I was just looking for a quiet place to study for midterms. She was sitting in the back row by the window, a textbook open in front of her, staring blankly at the glass. She didn't say a word when I walked in, and neither did I. I turned to walk back out the door, but her voice stopped me. Did you ever actually want to be like me? I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Never, I answered without turning around. But I did think about destroying you. Well, you pulled it off, she said quietly. I finally turned to look at her. Monroe had lost that artificial, blinding glow. Her hair was thrown up in a messy clip. She was wearing an oversized hoodie and sweatpants. There was zero effort to impress anyone. Her skin was bare, and her voice lacked any of its usual theatrical flair. She sounded shockingly normal. I never wanted it to end up like this, she whispered. But I also had no idea how to stop it, she paused. I don't know how to do anything else. I was about to respond when the door swung open. Holden! His face was drawn tight, his jaw clenched. He looked at both of us, but his eyes immediately locked onto Monroe. Can we talk? He asked. She nodded. I stepped aside, preparing to leave, but Monroe raised a hand. I don't mind if she stays. Holden looked at me, clearly uncomfortable. Suit yourself, I said, hopping up to sit on the edge of a professor's desk, near the front. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to pretend I didn't care about how this ended. Holden walked down the aisle toward Monroe, but he stopped a few feet away. There was no more automatic protective instinct in his body language. Just a horribly awkward tension. This whole thing blew up in our faces, Holden said flatly. Monroe nodded. Yeah, the guys are pissed. Silas told me he's completely done with the group. Deacon won't even reply to my texts, and I'm just sitting here, realizing I have zero personality outside of you guys. Her words dropped like a lead weight in the empty classroom. Monroe blinked a few times. She wasn't crying, but she looked more exposed than I had ever seen. Here. I always told you I needed you to protect me, she said, looking up at him. But really, I was just trapping you so you wouldn't leave me. Holden swallowed hard and took half a step backward. And I let you do it, he confessed, because I was terrified of trying to figure out who I was without someone needing me to save them. I leaned forward on the desk, not out of morbid curiosity, but out of genuine respect. I was watching a deeply toxic bond finally break in the healthiest way. Possible no screaming, no manipulation, just brutal honesty. So, I guess this is goodbye? Monroe asked, her voice cracking slightly. Holden looked down at his boots. I think this is just us finally stopping the lie that whatever we had was actually healthy. Monroe looked at him with a strange mix of profound grief and total relief. It was as if a part of her had been begging for this outcome for years. I hope you find something real, Holden. You too, Monroe. They stared at each other for a few seconds. No hugs. No, I'll always love you. Just two people finally acknowledging the damage they had done to each other, because they were too scared to be alone. Holden turned to walk out. Before he reached the door, he looked at me. Sloane, I'm sorry. I slipped off the desk. I forgive you, I told him, but I don't expect anything from you anymore. He gave a sharp nod and walked out the door. Monroe didn't move. I didn't win, you know, I told her into the quiet room. Neither did I, she replied. But at least we aren't faking it anymore. She lifted her head to look at me. Her eyes held no anger, no fake affection, just the truth. Thank you, she said. I didn't reply. I just walked out of the classroom, my footsteps echoing quietly. In the hall, the great campus dynasty hadn't fallen in a massive, fiery explosion. It had ended in total silence. The weeks that followed were strange. Not empty, just entirely different. The group was completely dead. Deacon switched to evening lab classes and stopped sitting anywhere near Holden. Silas relocated his regular study spot to a different floor of the library. Holden became a ghost, walking to classes with his head down, looking incredibly introspective. And Monroe just faded out of the spotlight. I'd see her occasionally in the campus coffee shop, either alone or quietly chatting with a couple of girls from her bio lab. She didn't talk obnoxiously loud anymore. She didn't wear designer sundresses to an 8 a.m. lecture. Sometimes she looked exhausted. Sometimes she looked at peace. But she never looked at me with that arrogant superiority ever again. As for me, I stopped trying to prove I belonged. I walked around campus like a girl who had absolutely nothing left to prove. My dorm roommates, who had warned me on day one, started talking to me with a quiet, lingering admiration. They never said, "We told you so." They just smiled and happily made room for me on our futon, one random Tuesday afternoon, while the sun was warming the concrete steps of the main campus library. Silas walked up holding 2 paper cups from the local coffee shop. "Black coffee," he said, handing one down to me. "That's how you actually like it, right?" I accepted the cup and slid over to make room for him on the steps. "Since when? Do you remember that?" "Since the day you stopped pretending you liked iced matcha lattes." I laughed softly. We sat side by side in companionable silence for a few minutes. He watched the clouds move over the campus skyline. I watched him. There was something about his calm profile, about the incredibly grounded way he existed in the world, that made me feel more secure than any grand romantic gesture ever could. "So, what are we going to do with all of this?" he asked casually, taking a sip of his coffee. "With what?" With this fresh start, I set my cup down on the concrete step and slowly intertwined my fingers with his. "I only have one rule this time." "What is it?" "If something bothers us, we say it out loud. No more keeping secrets until they rot us from the inside out." He nodded thoughtfully. Then he turned his head to look at me, flashing that incredibly sweet private smile that he seemed to reserve only for me. "I want to take this really slow." "Me too," I agreed. "And honest. Always." We kissed for the very first time right there on the library steps. There was no grand ceremony. It wasn't some cinematic, sweeping moment. It was just soft, warm, and entirely natural. It felt like we had been waiting for this exact moment without rushing it. When we finally pulled away, I didn't say a word. Neither did he. The rest of the college campus kept moving frantically around us, but we had found a quiet pocket of the world where everything finally made sense. In the distance, I saw Monroe walking down the main pathway. She was walking by herself, holding a textbook to her chest. No drama, no entourage. She looked over and saw me. I saw her, and something in her eyes was totally different. There was no hatred. There was no fear, just a quiet, mutual acknowledgement. Maybe, when it came down to it, neither of us had ever truly been the villain. We were just 2 girls who were terrified of being invisible in a world that demands you play a part. Silas gently squeezed my hand. I squeezed back, fully realizing that I was no longer playing a game to destroy someone else. For the very first time in my life, I was finally playing for myself.